in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm really excited to welcome two guests onto our show, Mercedes Ballard, co-founder and talent advisor at Heristic, and Kristin Bonds, co-founder and strategy advisor at Heristic. Thank you so much for being here. Both of you want to introduce yourselves to our audience, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, how did you both answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
So I'll go ahead and get us started. Name is Mercedes Ballard, pronouns she, her. I am a talent acquisition, talent management specialist. And above all, I like to consider myself a people person through and through. I love people. I love connecting with people. I love talking to people. I love listening to people. It's something that has manifested its way into not only my professional career, but also in terms of some of like my hobbies and interests. For instance, I actually love to study human psychology, especially around human behavior and relationships. And I think that this interest, mind you, I'm not a psychologist, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it has allowed me to, get to know my clients a little bit better, and the work that we do with our clients' employees, understand how to handle, sensitive conversations and communication, understand how, people may be reacting out of an intrinsic motivator rather than like the situation at hand. And so it's made my work a little bit more fulfilling with regards to what we do here at Heuristic. And then as far as what did I want to be when I grow up, it's weird. I actually oscillated between wanting to be a veterinarian because I loved my dogs, and then also wanting to be the president of the United States of America because I was like, I'm going to be the first woman, Black president. Like, that's me. So
I love that.
I would vote for you, Mercedes.
Thank you. Thank you. And also, do forgive my voice. I have a little tickle in the back of my throat. So if I cough a couple of times, I do apologize.
No, all good. Thanks for doing the interview when you have a raspy voice. What about you, Kristen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Bonds. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya. And I would tell you about myself that I'm an activist, a political junkie, and a foodie living here in Austin, Texas. And when I was younger, everyone who met me and everyone who's ever known me from childhood would have told you that I was going to be a lawyer when I grew up. And in some ways, I think I am, in the fact that I am constantly finding myself in very healthy debate and discussion on topics related to law, and also speaking on behalf of others to make some sort of case pretty often.
I love that. I think that's so important to have these healthy conversations around what we believe in. How do you think both of your personal journeys have really led you both to co-found Heuristic?
Well, I love our story. Mercedes and I both have a lot of history, decade plus, of existing in technical office spaces as HR professionals, both as recruiters, talent leaders, etc. And that experience taught us a lot about the inner workings of employee journeys in businesses. And we also learned a lot about ourselves as women of color in those spaces and how things are not entirely set up in our favor. I like to tell our story how I was working at a startup that was doing some pretty cool AI stuff. And Mercedes was set up prior to me joining as my dedicated agency partner for hardware specialty recruiting. And so we had a vendor client relationship for over a year where she was absolutely the best recruiter I'd ever worked with. And we had this barrier between us where we couldn't quite cross over into like the friendship zone, but we knew we wanted to. And that entire time we worked together in that capacity, I was trying to steal her away from her agency to come join our startup. And I will say that I was successful eventually. I convinced her to leave her agency, her well-paid agency, and come work for my cool startup. And she started in March 2020. In May of 2020, due to COVID, we were both laid off. And I knew then she had some downtime. We both did. And once we started working together as colleagues, and once we started talking to each other as friends, we have so much in common. We have so much in common around our belief systems, our values, and the things that keep us up at night. So if you remember, May of 2020 is when George Floyd was murdered. And I will say that it's a good thing we didn't have a job then, because I was extremely emotionally invested in that work. I've been a activist in that space for a really long time, as has Mercedes. And we found that commonality and that motivator. And in that space, in as working in tech and seeing people talk about diversity and inclusion in tech for our entire careers and not seeing much movement, and then all of a sudden everything changed, that inspired us to take this leap. And I will tell you that finding a place to work, and having to build it ourselves probably, but finding a place to work where it hits all of your emotional buttons is the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done. I think Mercedes would probably say the same, because now it's our job every day to speak about things that we are deeply passionate about. And I really do think that the work that we do goes way further than we ever could have gone as individual activists. So that's our journey, and I can't wait to see where we go next.
I love that. That's an incredible journey. And I appreciate that you're building a place where you want to work that really values equity and inclusion. I know a lot of companies have been more publicly committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, which is really great. And some of the entry points are in that talent acquisition space in terms of hiring more BIPOC or folks of color into their organization, especially in technology. And I have a question that we probably get all the time around bandwidth and resources. If you're a team of one recruiter or one hiring manager, how can you diversify and intentionally hire outside of your immediate network as well? We've seen so many stories where people just hire folks they went to college with or folks that are in their immediate network. So definitely wanted to ask you both around that.
So I'll go ahead and get started on this. And I think in the question itself, you like hit the nail on the head. It's like, how do you be intentional? You have to be intentional about it, right? So there are a couple of ways that you can do this as a team of one, or a hiring manager or a recruiter, and that's be intentional about your pipeline sources, right? You mentioned already that like you're used to going to your alma mater, excuse me, and like hiring from schools that you've gone to and people that but look at other schools like HBCUs, reach out to different communities like Black in Tech that have access to the candidates that you're looking for. And it's not a lift, because those communities, they want people like you who want to do the right thing, want to have the right culture, want to hire the right people. They want to uplift those individuals as well. So that's the first thing, is like be intentional about those pipelines. And then another thing I would say is like be intentional about hiring for potential versus experience, because I think that's one of the issues that we run into a lot with, this person just doesn't have that experience, so I can't hire them. That's not necessarily true. What I mean is, like, instead of the general requirements of 3 years of experience in project management, look for a candidate's capacity to develop and to grow. There are a lot more traits, like a person's ability to adapt to challenges or to innovate, that will indicate how successful they will be in a position, more so than they have experience working on this particular tool. And I think the key is really to uncover like the ability of that person to adapt their different strengths to the responsibilities of that work position. So problem solving skills, or even like level of conscientiousness, are things that you may want to consider. Additionally, excuse me, some ways that you can actually actualize this is like rethink what your job description looks like. Ask yourself, when you're creating the job description, what actually needs to be done for this job to be done correctly. Ask yourself, what can be learned on the job versus what does this person need to have walking into the door? And then also, what are some of the transferable skills that are related to the skills that I'm looking for? That way, people with untraditional backgrounds have an opportunity to grow and to fit what the job description might look like. Also, you can get creative with your interview process. This is as simple as, asking more behavioral type interview questions, or doing a more complex team-based interview to understand, like, how does this person work with our group and how do they add to, the mix of the people that we already have. And you can even look at different online assessment tools. I know some organizations are using things like personality tests and whatnot in order to figure out how a person may be able to add to their team. The only thing I do say with all of these methods, and just in general, as you're figuring out and structuring your recruitment and interview process, is to look for potential points of bias and be ready to mitigate against that on the front end. So yeah, those are some of my ideas. And then, of course, you can always ask for help. There are a bunch of organizations that specialize in, hiring for diverse candidates, or, helping people build out these diverse pools. So ask for help.
I love that. I think those are a lot of tangible ways that folks who are a team of one or a scrappy team can really build out this pipeline. There are subject matter experts, there are agencies, there are these kind of tech organizations that you talked about as well, and asking yourselves these internal questions around job requirements, quote unquote, is important. I'm a big fan of transferable skills and hiring someone for the job you want them to do as opposed to the job they've already done in the past.
Exactly.
So say you are working with these folks, you're building out your pipeline. I want to know both of your opinions around referral programs. Are there ways that we can make these programs more inclusive, or is it just not great to have them as well?
Yeah, I've actually come of quite a bit of ways in learning about referral programs in my career. I've changed my mind a bunch on this. And what I'll tell you is that additional information has caused me to rethink the way I look at this. I've always said smart people know other smart people. And so when I've built referral programs from scratch, I built them for everyone in the company equally. And now I realize that that might not be hitting what we want to hit. And that might, in fact, reinforce some of the bias that already exists in those processes. And that's what we want to combat every time we find it. So when you have a representation problem that you might be trying to address or correct, you might want to be more intentional about building a referral program to specifically meet that. When you think about a college dorm room situation where someone's got a great idea, two guys in a garage, we're about to build Dell or Google or something. Yeah. Those chances are those two guys are guys, first of all. They're the same gender. They probably look alike. They might have the same kind of privilege. They're in the same place. And that's not what we want anymore. We don't want to start best ideas that are ever going to happen from a position of bias. So how do we be intentional about doing that? We need to intentionally seek out different types of viewpoints. That's going to make the product better. There are decades of studies to reinforce that. So when you're talking about making a referral program, what type of pipeline would you like more access to? What types of folks inside of your organization would you like to see more of? And build a referral program specifically around that. So what I mean by that is, I think it's a good strategy to have a general referral program, but I think the intentional program work that your recruiting team probably does. Can y'all still hear me? Okay, sorry, I had a computer malfunction there for a second. Everything went black. When y'all have an intentional program to focus on building a referral group, that's where you spend your time and effort and resources. That's where you spend the resources on coaching and hand-holding and doing that work to help your female population, your minority population, your disabled population, your veteran population, your LGBT population seek out their networks, because that's what you want to amplify.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense to build programs that are not broad and overarching perhaps, and more intentional and really sustainable and strategic in what you're trying to accomplish, and that aligns with your goals. For folks who are thinking about talent acquisition and talent pipeline, that's really important. But also when folks get in the door, it's equally as important to make sure that the workplace is set up for them to feel like they can do their best work, feel that they are included and that their opinion is valued. for growing small and medium-sized businesses, where do you begin in thinking about intentionally, there's that word again, scaling company culture, in particular in regards to creating an equitable workplace and thinking about DEI initiatives?
So just high level, and then I'm probably going to pass it over to Kristen, but I think being clear and transparent and intentional about who your organization is and what you're trying to achieve is a great place to start with this. And like understanding what is important to you as leadership, but not just you as leadership, but what is important to your employees, your customers, your vendors. I think it's helpful to consider some questions around like what is your organizational purpose and values. If you already know those, great, you're ahead of the game. But are you certain that your employees know it? Are you certain that your vendors know it? And are you certain that your customers also know your purpose and values? Second to that is like, what is the communication strategy behind it, right? Like, in what ways are you articulating your purpose and your values across different mediums so that, you're sharing this message over and over again with these audiences? And then, finally, like figure out how can you incorporate your purpose and your values into the organization culture. And that's like asking yourself, like, how does my purpose and value manifest itself in our rewards program and how we recognize our employees and how we promote particular employees, and like what performance reviews or like what rating people are getting on the performance reviews. It needs to be all encompassing of these kinds of intentionality and clarity.
Yeah, I'll just add to that everything Mercedes said is spot on. You want to focus on values as at your core, because you haven't had the chance to build everything else to support that yet, right? Like when you're a small business just getting started, you're never going to be able to interview a candidate for everything that's going to come their way. There will be so many obstacles that come in as a new business person that's scaling a business, things that you won't be able to anticipate. But what you can interview for is the way someone might handle those obstacles or decisions that come their way. And so you want to interview against criteria for the person choosing the path that aligns the most to something, your values. And so if you do the work ahead of time to clarify what that is, communicate what it is, like stand behind it and make it a part of your culture from the very beginning, it'll make it a lot easier to align in that and recruiting and building your team, but then also guiding the path towards all the future development that'll come. And I'll say that right alongside that is like the next most important thing after that is everything that has to do in your ops that you're building at the same time. You're always building the plane while you're flying it, always, every time. So what we found in our experience is that systemic bias is most likely to be found in places that affect the everyday lives of employees, those systemic pieces that are part of just corporate life. And when you're building your company's organizational and operational arm from the beginning, you want to make sure you're building those key infrastructure pieces, around things like career trajectory, pay equity, interview processes, all those things. You need to build those intentionally around bias, dismantle the bias before it even has a chance to grow. And if you're not comfortable kind of making the call on whether or not something that you've always done it that way is biased or not, bring in an expert to help, because there are a lot of people trying to push this knowledge now. We're some of them, but it's so built into processes that sometimes it's hard to see because we're so used to it. We know about things like glass ceiling and pay equity issues, but like, do you actually know how to spot it and what to do to combat that? There's a lot of resources to learn from this just about everywhere, but if you don't know, please ask and reach out.
Absolutely. I think it's not just enough to have your values written off in the kind of kitchen or in the kind of remote first kind of Zoom or Slack channels, but you have to live them, right? You have to be intentional around your processes, look at things that aren't necessarily quote unquote broken, but redesign them to be more equitable, because you can always be doing more in the workplace. Of course, it's a microcosm of society and everybody is coming in with different life experiences. They're at a different point in their career journey as well. And people are going to have feedback about things that the company are doing, things that your leaders are doing as well. And people might feel comfortable coming to their manager or, sharing with folks in their organization. And I wanted to ask from your perspectives how you see employee feedback management as an important tool to really build and continually build this culture of listening and trust, and how you see this kind of culture manifesting at successful companies with psychological safety, which is something that a lot of folks are discussing right now.
So I would start with saying feedback is data, and data is absolutely paramount to making sound decisions on what to do within your organization. This is beyond just a culture of listening, it's culture in general. So building a culture of listening is it's more than just getting and managing that feedback. It's the way that the feedback is instilled within, feedback in general is instilled as a value within the organization. It's the way that the organization makes it accessible to give feedback. We are huge fans of making sure that our clients have multiple modalities of, collecting feedback from their employees so that we are appealing to, all types of audiences. Some people are very comfortable talking to their manager in a one-on-one, whereas some people want to be completely anonymous, and even their positive feedback, they don't want it linked back to them. And so making sure that it's accessible to all. And then lastly, in order to really embed this culture of listening, you have to make sure that there's action or an outcome to the feedback that is collected. I think most employees get frustrated because, we have these annual surveys, these pulse checks and whatnot, but they don't actually know what is happening. They're never getting, reports on what kind of feedback managers are getting, or seeing action from, complaints or concerns or comments that they've mentioned. And again, I want to focus not just on the negative, but the positive too. If an employee comes to you and is like, I think I have a really great idea on how we can communicate better with our clients, but then that idea goes nowhere, that's extremely disheartening. That lowers things like engagement and work satisfaction and things of that sort. So ways that you actually see this manifesting within the organization, having multiple modalities, as I mentioned, having action or an outcome from that feedback, and then other things like not reprimanding employees. That's really a way to make a psychologically safe environment, as well as not brushing concerns under the rug, and making sure that feedback, whether it's negative or positive, is shared amongst particular teams and departments, not just key executive leadership stakeholders within the organization. Sorry.
No, you're good. Feedback is definitely a data point and just an insight for a company as well. And it's important to remember there's not just negative feedback, there's constructive feedback, positive feedback, and everything in between as well. In terms of data, I know that companies are really, especially now, trying to be those employers of choice. And that might mean different things for different folks as well in different parts of their career journeys. But what would you say is the number one kind of metric you'd recommend leaders to look at when they're saying, okay, we are cultivating a healthy company culture, we are going to continue to work on that, so it's not a destination, but keeping a gauge on the progress that's being made, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to pick just one.
Yeah.
Mercedes and I are data fanatics, and we want all of the data all the time.
Yeah.
But there's so many options on the table. But with the great resignation that's happening right now, kind of tossing a lot of archaic ideas around work up in the air, the question that I'm paying attention to most right now is do your employees intend to remain at your company for the short or long term? We ask this question in some of the surveys that we do, kind of do you see yourself here over the next 2 years or 5 years? And if someone is anonymously answering a survey, sharing their intentions to remain, that's a really positive sign. And I'd like to kind of focus in on that. It may also indicate that that's an intention there to bring more folks in. If they're happy there, if they intend to remain there, whether it's the great perks, the great pay, or some other motivator, they might bring other folks with them. And that's what you really want to see. But that's just my opinion. I think there's dozens of metrics that I want all of all the time. What do you have, Mercedes?
Yeah, I I agree and disagree with you, Kristen, per usual. I actually think something that most people are probably already collecting, and it's maybe oversimplistic answer for you, Christina, is the employee net promoter score. It measures, loyalty, how employees feel in their role, and whether they feel like the company is looking after them. So I think it's a good proxy for, measuring employee engagement, which is generally a very complex thing to measure. But like in terms of making sure it's healthy for all, I suggest looking at your ENPS, excuse me, by demographics. I think that would be an extremely telling data point for your organization to make sure not only are you guys getting a high employee net promoter score overall, but is it the same for every type of person within your organization? So that's my little 2 cents.
Absolutely. I think that those are kind of good examples of metrics. And again, asking how employees are feeling about the company, about changes that are being made is really important. And Mercedes, you mentioned that second piece of active listening, which is taking action. I mean, you can't change everything, but what you can do is kind of share what you heard and what you're doing about kind of the constructive, positive, negative feedback that was heard as well, and making sure that you're checking in and having a two-way conversation with the individual or the group of folks as well. Can you give an example of a company you work with who implemented a change in their either process, initiative, or strategy due to employee feedback? Of course, you don't have to give their names. It could just be a general example.
Yeah, I can think of like dozens of examples from the startups I worked at, especially since in the early days of a company, there tends to be this like all hands on deck type of mentality for decision making. So whether it's snack management, which is a real category of things in the workplace, office decor, or like big decisions like how you decide on your values as a group, for example. I think there's a lot of different ways that this manifests. And this might be a little bit of a technical example, but I think it's a really, really cool thing that I've seen happen firsthand, which is in a company that's like primarily engineers. There was an adoption of a wiki tool for documentation and transparency. And with that adoption of a new tool came some conversation and debate around how to use it. What's the best way to do it? And they actually created a culture of feedback around giving feedback for this particular thing. And it became the culture for the rest of the company. And it's all in the name of transparency, right? Documentation is like a huge thing for technical folks. You need a new person to be able to join the team and pick up right away. Mm-hmm. And that's why you need to write code in this elegant way that's like not just one person knows how to operate it. So what they did was they created a forum type of environment for everyone to express their opinions about the choices that were being made. And then as a group, the decision was made to keep that forum discussion available in that space forever, so that anyone who ever comes to join the company can go back and review how all technical decisions have been made. And in that way, it's like everyone gets to participate in that discussion. And you can also see how discussions progress over time and how those decisions are made. And then it's all documented for posterity. And I just think that's a really cool example of like using feedback to create a culture of feedback and transparency.
I love that example. And I think it's a great kind of example around operationalizing systems and making sure that folks have the historical context as well, especially at businesses that are continuing to grow and things are changing all of the time. Even when you have all of these mechanisms and you are committed to creating the best place to work for employees, again, people are bringing in their own experiences where maybe their feedback wasn't really celebrated or asked for in general as well. And they're coming into a new environment where trust hasn't been built yet. It's an active conversation. And for whatever reason, you might not feel like you can give that feedback in a non-anonymous way. I want to ask like, what role you see anonymous feedback playing in a psychologically safe workplace environment as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's safe to say that the option to both give and get anonymous feedback is paramount to a psychologically safe workplace. But as far as the role, I would like to think that it can enable organizations to make better decisions around like leadership performance and promotions, particular training opportunities within the organization, as well as in more of an HR compliance hat, like, how to get ahead of particular compliance related issues that may, or situations that may be manifesting itself in particular teams or departments. And I think that's also where like feedback with like data collection or AI comes into place to like be able to see these trends over time, to make those kinds of business decisions. And I do want to again highlight the importance to collect both, you know, like both positive and negative performance, anonymous feedback, I'm sorry. I can see there are instances where an individual may have had an impact on someone. For example, if you're in a board meeting and a man stands up to make sure that a woman's voice is heard, she may want to give that feedback to that person so that, that person's performance review can highlight this kind of thing, or they can be rewarded or appreciated for, stepping up. However, she may not want to actually put her name on that review because it could like reprimand her in a way, like as not being, needing or accepting help that, she wasn't assertive enough to stand up for herself. And so it can enable both sides of the coins in terms of like this positive and negative outcome from anonymous feedback. Obviously, this is sort of kind of just a theory right now, but I do think that employee feedback mixed with AI and machine learning as this industry starts to grow is ultimately what's going to inform a lot of organizations on like how they develop their organization and like give that comprehensive pulse on the health of their organization culture.
I definitely agree with you as well. There are nuanced and really specific situations as well where you want to offer kind of all of the ways that folks would be comfortable sharing their positive, negative, or any kind of feedback with an organization, with a manager, with a company as well. I know that we've been talking about kind of different areas that both of you are passionate about. It sounds like you are working on a lot of different projects as well, but I always like to ask folks, what's the next problem or situation you're currently trying to solve?
You want to go first, Mercedes?
I do. This is really relevant to actually a conversation we were just having yesterday. But we recently were discussing in that DEI initiatives are being deprioritized by HR leaders already. Although this information is a bit concerning, I think that the inherent challenge of it all is that DEI initiatives aren't actually going far enough for enough people. And so that's like the challenge that I feel like we are working on. I think there are many marginalized groups that are getting omitted from the conversation, such as, those with visual and hearing impairments, or even formerly incarcerated folks that still need to be given a seat at the table. So I think like the long and the short of it is that like, I feel we will once again be facing an uphill battle and propelling this work forward for this new majority that I refer to. But this is not going to be a one size fits all. It's a complex problem that we're trying to solve. There will be, progress and then backslides and back and forth, but there's not a quick fix button. And it's the challenge that I think that Kristen and I are both really ready to step up to the plate and take action behind.
Yeah, we're never going back, right?
No.
Like we're never going back to being quiet about these things in the office space. At least I'm not.
I actually want to add real quick. I was going to say this earlier. So heristic, our values are be courageous, be intentional, and be future forward. And I think we've talked about a lot of these things without explicitly saying them, but Kristen makes a huge point. Like we're not going back. It's instilled in our organization to be future forward looking and to like take actions on, what do we want tomorrow to look like, not what can't we change about the past.
Exactly. I'll just add that one of the other big problems that I have recently found myself spending a lot of time working on, Heuristic kind of has a pro bono arm that we spend a lot of energy focusing on community issues. And here in Austin, in the state of Texas in particular, we're facing this really interesting problem where most folks know that Austin is this like tech boom town over the past like 5-10 years. And there's a lot of tech business moving and headquartering in Austin all of a sudden. And there's this huge migration of talent, of tech talent to Austin as well. But despite that, Austin is not known as a typically diverse place. And the high skill, like high education talent that's moving here is not helping with that diversity issue.
Right.
And what I realized in my work with the community organizations I'm a part of in the past couple of years is that despite Austin being this like Silicon Hills, boom town for technology, there are whole communities and neighborhoods in Austin that don't have broadband access. And the digital equity component of this conversation around inclusivity in the workplace begins earlier in that process with access to technology from a really early age. And we know for sure that in this lovely, beautiful red state that we live in, it's not being prioritized.
Right.
And so what I find myself struggling with now is helping rally the cause around these big tech players that are coming to Austin and having a talent shortage when they arrive. And there's a couple of different solutions. We can make Austin a more attractive place for that diverse and interesting tech talent that we want to live here and thrive here. And then on top of that, how can we home grow that talent as well? Like if we could go to Elon Musk, who's just brought Tesla to Austin in a really significant way, and tell him, we know exactly how to supply that giant office building you just built with all of the tech workers for the next 15 years. And the solution to that is STEM education from the very beginning. That is not currently being prioritized, but we need the political players and policy pieces of this to fall into place. Can you please help us? And that is just a conversation that I am getting deeper and deeper into. And I might actually be a lot closer to my childhood political goals than I ever thought I would be.
That's incredible to underscore. And also digital equity is something that people often definitely do not prioritize or forget about. It's just everyone has internet access or broadband and they have Zoom, but in reality, that's not the case. Having a personal laptop or having access to a work laptop is also something. Having the tools and space to work from your home if you are a remote first company or even a hybrid is definitely things and privileges we need to think about as well. Mercedes and Kristen, we've talked about a lot here today, but are there 1 to 2 key insights you hope listeners bring with them after listening to our conversation here today?
I think my 1 to 2 things is just, it's never too early to start thinking about your people and culture strategy, even if you don't have the right or the enough funding to invest in all of the initiatives. Being clear and transparent about the value that your people bring to your organization by preemptively talking about employee satisfaction related topics and benefits, you're demonstrating your commitment to your people and the intentionality behind your actions. So that's all I say is just be clear, start thinking about it, be intentional, transparent, and watch your organization grow.
Yeah, I echo that. It's all about placing yourself in the mindset towards making these dreams that we have a reality, and you have to start with thinking about it first. So that's what we push you forwards towards.
Yeah, and with that, it's not always about being like right or having the most comprehensive solution right out the gate. Nobody has that expectation of you or your organization. But when you're intentional about like your vision, where you're going, and like who you are as an organization, I really do believe that the rest will follow. And like those baby steps that you take do, aggregate together to create like this harmonious workspace. So.
Absolutely. Do something. And it's never too early to start and to really manifest these ideas and kind of thoughts that we have around creative and inclusive workspace. Mercedes, Kristen, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Christina.
Yes, of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening and AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.